Welcome back to Science Genies. A lot of people always talk about, I want to increase my metabolism. I want to strengthen my immune system. But I bet they've never really thought about that the answer could be lying inside them. In our last episode, we discussed how trillions of microbes that are living inside us influence our digestion, our metabolism, and even our mood in some cases. We explored how diet and lifestyle shape the gut health and why maintaining the right balance of bacteria is key to the overall well-being of our gut. Now, in this episode, we're going to take that a little bit further, talking about more practical ways to optimize your microbiome health. How can you take control of your gut health starting today? How does our outside environment
Mhm.
impact our mitochondrial health?
Exercise, for example, impacts our mitochondrial health, and how well we sleep impacts our microbiome and mitochondrial health. Our stress levels impact our mitochondrial health. But maybe what you're getting at is, the importance of being outside in the environment and soil. And there's interesting studies that have shown that folks that garden actually tend to have more diverse gut microbiomes, which may be related to their exposure to the soil microbes, possibly. Organic foods, those that have been grown with less pesticides, actually have more diverse microbiomes associated with them. So the foods that we eat, like for example, an apple, most of its healthy microbiome actually is within its core, where all the seeds are, and we just throw that part out. But all the foods that we eat have naturally microbiomes associated with them, especially those that are grown organically. They have more diverse microbiomes. And there may be a connection between eating those types of foods, the ones that you've gardened yourself, or those that are bought from, roadside stands, for example, that have been grown in the community. Those are going to have more microbes that could contribute to a healthier, more diverse microbiome in your own gut.
In your practice as a physician, have you seen patients come in with a completely what you would deem an unhealthy gut microbiome and then revert that back into a healthy microbiome based off of their diet?
Great question. Most of the treatments that would use for inflammatory bowel disease involve therapies that aren't microbiome oriented. If you look at irritable bowel syndrome as an alternate example, that's the condition where you don't really have inflammation that's obvious in the lining, and it's at least in a subset, probably more related to the microbes that are present in the gut. I wouldn't say that, I've seen documented um, complete reversals of the gut microbiome, but I will say following certain diets where you avoid foods that make that microbiome unhealthy, that have certain things like, for example, inulin in them that grow an unhealthy microbiome in some people.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so inulin's a natural fiber that's present in a lot of foods, present in a processed form in tons of processed foods. You'll see it as garlic powder, onion powder, inulin, chicory root. Those are all different code words for this type of fiber, inulin. Some people that have irritable bowel syndrome, if they have too much inulin, and even in just standard garlic or onion, they'll develop symptoms, bloating, diarrhea, gas, discomfort. And the diet that I'm referring to, which is the low FODMAP diet for folks with irritable bowel syndrome, that can help avoiding that fiber. So not all fibers are created equal. Not all fibers are equally tolerated by everyone. It really depends on your specific diverse ecosystem, what's best for you. Some people just can't tolerate inulin, others are just fine with it. So going back to your original question, have I seen reversals? I've seen people get remarkably better by avoiding certain fibers, for sure. In other cases, I've seen people get remarkably better by adding certain fibers. So to flip things, folks with IBS will often do very well by adding a type of fiber that's found in psyllium husk. One of the commercial options would be Metamucil. There's other things that are added to Metamucil. So I usually say, hey, just do psyllium husk. But that in research has been shown to help people with irritable bowel syndrome, help solidify their stools, decrease diarrhea, decrease bloating. So it's really not a one size fits all. But yes, I have seen improvement in people's gut health through a thoughtful approach, an individualized approach to diet for their specific microbes.
I can attest to that. I have IBS myself. I can't have garlic or onion. It's very difficult to go out and eat with people. And I do low FODMAP diet, but it doesn't always work. And I think a part of that in learning more about the microbiome of my gut is that I think that it's like for me, it's certain amounts of foods. So I
Mhm,
can have a certain amount of food without feeling sick. And then the next day, sometimes I can eat that same food and then I'm sick again. But
mhm,
it also depends on my stress level. So if I'm already stressed out, then I can't, like almost everything makes me feel sick at that point. And especially caffeine, it just makes me, it's almost as my body is saying, like, no, you're going to be more anxious. And
mhm.
I'm it's irritable bowel syndrome for me is, it's terrible because it's not diagnosable in some ways, the same as IBD where you have something where you could physically see, and it's terrible, but yeah, for everybody out there who's suffering from IBS, I can totally relate to you.
Yeah, and there's a few things I wanna emphasize in what you just said, because I think it's really well put. One is we're not all the same, and one person's IBS is different from another person's IBS, but the other that you said is it puts a real social damper, right, on your ability to eat with friends and family, and particularly difficult when you're going out for dinner. Less so if you're preparing food in your own home and invite people over, but also equally difficult if you're going to a potluck or over to a friend's house for dinner. It can be a little bit awkward when they've made this delicious food and that you're going to feel miserable eating it, may become less social after eating it because you feel miserable.
Yeah.
And trying to navigate that can be really tricky. So, yeah, I definitely empathize with those challenges. But I think if you listen to your body and you find out what your triggers are and you find out some tools to help with that, that can make a huge difference. And it sounds like in your own health journey that, you've identified inulin. So that's great. That's a huge step forward. Not always perfect because it's in everything, almost everything, all processed foods. But
I don't eat
yeah,
processed. I'm a fanatic about my diet,
yeah.
because of my, my health issues with IBS, and I cook everything at home.
Mhm.
Another thing is, I wanna ask, how does alcohol, impact the gut microbiome?
Yeah. So alcohol, the latest health recommendations around alcohol is to just avoid it. And
Mhm.
even, a drink has been shown, a drink a day, for example, has been shown to have adverse health outcomes. So maybe there's some, qualifications there for things that have high polyphenol content and that helps mitigate some of the adverse effects of the alcohol and be things like red wine, maybe even beer has, tons of polyphenols in it. But what is it doing to the microbiome? Can tell you what it's doing to the gut. Alcohol opens up the barrier, the tight junctions, and so it makes the gut more permeable. And when the gut's more permeable, even healthy microbes can be more inflammatory. And when those microbes contribute to inflammation, then that becomes a bit of a vicious cycle because then more inflammatory, unhealthy microbes grow. Um, there's probably direct effects of alcohol on the microbes themselves as well, but and it's maybe a little bit of the chicken and the egg. Is it alcohol impacting the gut, impacting the microbes, or is it alcohol impacting the microbes, impacting the gut? either way, alcohol generally is not something that treats the gut well, is the bottom line.
I I can agree. I had a conversation with someone else about how the microbiome of some people or all of us is kind of also defined by our environment in the world. So maybe the country that you're living in, the culture that you're in. And have you seen the Netflix documentary called The Blue Zone?
Mm,
So I found it really fascinating. One of the things that is a huge part of longevity in life is community.
mm.
And another thing is exercise, and then they eat a lot of plant foods. One of my curious thoughts is the community aspect of that because when you're exposed to speaking to different people, you are interacting with their microbes, and that diversifies your microbes. And then another thing I thought about was because one of the people was this older woman, she was super cute and funny. She drank wine every single day, and that was a part
Mhm.
of her thing. I don't remember where she was from, but she was like, "This is what's keeping me young."
Yeah, community is absolutely critical. So I have these mnemonics, the 4 M's, which I mentioned. For the molecule piece, which is the food piece, there's the 4 F's, there's fibers, phenols, good fats, and fermented foods. But at the base of both of these mnemonics is community. Um, Community is absolutely essential. Like, what are we without community? Who are we without community? What is purpose without community? I mean, it gives us meaning, truly is everything. Our friends, our family. If we exist in a vacuum, we don't exist. Like, literally. We wouldn't have food to eat, for example, but we also wouldn't have companionship. And so, in terms of people's health journeys, I think it's really important to recognize that. Like, what is health unless you have a community, friends and family to share it with? Um, and in recognizing that, I think it can become a real asset because then you recognize, well, maybe part of my health journey is actually doing some of these things in community with people, with friends, with family as a support, as a part of making it fun. And so that could be having, a friend or a partner or a buddy that you go exercising with. And on those days that you're less inclined, they get you out into the rainy abyss that I'm actually looking at right now here in Seattle and wondering whether I'm going to go for a run today or not. Or, preparing a meal together in community with friends and family in your kitchen. Like, that makes all the difference. Then it's not a chore, it's actually fun. So when you're thinking about those 4 M's, thinking about how you might be able to do that in community to give it meaning can be really powerful. So I love that idea of community. Maybe not quite what you were thinking about. I think you were referring to like the sharing of microbes within community. And that's absolutely true as well. You ask, well, what's the evolutionary reason for kissing? And part of it is actually sharing microbes and sensing partner's health through smells, pheromones, etc. And that's true in less intimate settings as well. There've been really interesting studies done on conferences, for example, where people come from all around the world and how all of their microbes are actually you can sample them in the air and there's a mingling of those microbes that happen. So there probably is some exchange that's happening at that level as well. And, just as our social communities and networks are critical, we have communities within our guts as well. Those are our microbiomes and how our inner community interfaces with our external communities and how they synergize is super fascinating because our gut microbiome community impacts our mood and how social we are, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Because you also mentioned earlier about how staying at home, maybe watching TV or being on video games impacts your microbiome. And maybe that's because instead of you being in person with your friends, now you're through the screen and it's not like you could share micros through the screen. At least we haven't invented an AI like that yet. So, no, that makes so much sense. Another question I have is, so we do see a lot of these fiber supplements on the market, and you see a lot of bodybuilders and workout fanatics add fiber
Mhm.
to their smoothies or shakes. How effective is that fiber that they're possibly adding to their smoothie versus if they were to just eat a whole fruit?
Yeah, it's a great question. The best source of fiber is gonna be from their natural source, which would be in the whole plants, the foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, whole grains. And the reason is that fiber comes packaged part and parcel with all the other nutrients in the right ratios. So, part of the reason that fiber is so healthy is it slows the absorption of the simple sugars and it helps us metabolize those simple sugars. So, that ratio of total carbohydrate to fiber is actually something that's borne out in actual pathophysiology within our cells. Likewise, fibers that are present naturally in food often have polyphenols studding them. And so you're getting fiber and polyphenol together in those whole foods, and on and on and on. That said, going back to that pragmatic view of there is a place for functional foods. We do lead very busy lifestyles. We are constrained by finances. We do have families were being tugged in 100 different directions with work and personal life. So, what gives? And this is where I think functional foods, even supplements, can be useful. And certain fiber supplements are incrementally beneficial for your health. This has been studied, has been shown in peer-reviewed research that adding a fiber supplement to a diet, certain types of fibers can impact your metabolic health. So, and recognizing that the majority of us are very far from reaching our fiber needs and how busy our lifestyles are, adding functional foods and fiber supplements, can help you get to that threshold. But it's also important to recognize that just taking a fiber supplement versus adding that fiber supplement to a food that you're eating to try to recapitulate a whole food and how it's working in that natural context. That's going to be better if you add it to a food than if you're having it separately, because part of what it's doing is slowing the absorption of those sugars. And if you're taking it separately, it won't be doing that.
Mhm. So does that also have an impact on how our body is then breaking down those calories that we're intaking?
It does, and at many levels. So there's some really interesting studies showing that the amount of calories that come out in our stool are higher if you consume fiber with a meal. So that's an example of an inefficiency in absorption that in our modern day society can actually be helpful.
Yeah.
So there, yeah, you absorb less of the some calories with fiber added to the diet, but the other way it's working is at the level of the cell powerhouses, the mitochondria, because it upregulates those mitochondria and makes the cells more healthy, efficient energy burners. And so you're burning more energy that way as well.
So you are a parent, as you stated
Mm.
before, I think. How are you implementing these rules into your family's life as you're a super busy person, a doctor, a professor, an entrepreneur, and many more things? How are you implementing these tricks into your family's everyday life?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful ways of parenting is by example. So, didactically teaching your children through lectures, like, this is what you need to eat. Stop eating, as much sugar, eat more of this. That's going to be less useful than modeling and being realistic. And my daughters will be the first to tell me it's okay to cheat every now and then and, not be legalistic about these things. I think that, completely eliminating sugar, for example, is really going to not set you up for success or set your children up for success. So, for example, we just had Halloween, and This is a holiday that embraces gluttony of candy, and we let our kids just enjoy their candy. And generally, they're pretty good at self-regulating. When they see, how we eat, they have that model, but are at the same time kind of left to their own devices, what they end up doing without us saying, "Don't eat lots of sugar."
Hmm.
Part of it is making a point to prepare home cooked meals at least once a day and enjoying that meal in community. So we have family dinners. My hope is that translates then into their own family dinners when they're older. They remember the value of that, the community time, the time of sharing of the day and sharing of health. So, yeah, I think the bottom line is it's much more powerful to do than to tell when it comes to parenting. Kids will follow in an example much more readily than they will follow by being told what to do. And that's been one of the more important lessons in parenting for me anyway. But I'm sure your listeners have
Yeah.
their own ideas. And yeah, it'd be interesting to reach out and hear their thoughts as well.
I'm not a parent, but I am a daughter. And I can tell you that when I left for college, I think I appreciated my mother so much more after. I was just like, oh my goodness, I have to do adult stuff. I have to be conscious of what I'm eating when I go to the I would call my mom on the phone and be in the grocery store and be like, "What should I cook for dinner today?" Just because I was just like, "I don't know. What am I supposed?" There's so many options. So, parenting, there's so many different ways to parent, and yeah, I think your children appreciate, at least for me, I think that you see a shift in your relationship with your parents later on in life where you gain this appreciation. At least that's what's happened for me.
I think that's true. And, every step of life where you turn the page, right? It's a new chapter. You're at college or maybe after college, and you have your first job and, your own apartment or marriage or kids. Like these are quantum leaps in our experience as individuals. And um, your parents have often been through each of those steps before, and they become a wealth of, knowledge and resource for you. But B, you just have this like new profound appreciation for what they did for you when you were a kid going, experiencing what it was for them to be parents, etc. So yeah, it's true. Incidentally, my mom is visiting right now, and so we're kind of, it's always fun talking about growing up and then, me as a kid and contrasting that with my own kids with my mom around.
Yeah. Well, one of our last questions is going to be, who is your science genie?
Science genie. So in other words, who is my scientific inspiration?
It doesn't have to be that because to
Oh,
me, science is encompassing of all. So anybody can be a science genie.
interesting. Okay. Well, I guess I've been really inspired um, by some of the great physicians and scientists, microbiologists of the turn of the century. And we know them, some of them anyway, as household names. So, pasteurized milk, that comes from Louis Pasteur. He was a French microbiologist. And he was one of the first to understand microbes. And back in those days, microbes were painted and perceived as pathogens. And so, pasteurization was sterilizing milk or cheese or, you know, anything so that it didn't grow bad microbes that would make you sick, like Listeria or E. coli. And it was their research and their insights that paved the way for a massive step forward in medicine and health and the development of aseptic technique in surgery, where surgeons, big surprise, wash their hands and outcomes were better and their patients did better, or use certain techniques to keep the operative fields sterile, and development of antibiotics. So all of those microbial greats, Eli Metchnikoff would be another example, and he was one of the first to think about microbes in a healthy way and understood and researched the value of fermented foods and how those were contributing to health. He was one of the first gut health experts, a little ahead of his time in the 1900s. I find them very inspiring, and I think we'll probably look back on these next 20, 50 years, and all of the discoveries that are happening around the microbiome, and not how microbes are contributing to our diseases, but how microbes are contributing to our health, the flip side, and recognize that this is just as big a step forward in our understanding of health as Eli Metchnikoff and Louis Pasteur were of the 19th century. So yeah, I think maybe that's too literal of an interpretation of Science Genie, but I very much find inspiration in the microbial greats of the past.
No, Science Genie, as I said, science is all encompassing. So
Yeah,
there's no one right answer. That's why we do research.
yeah.
I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, and also let everyone know that to keep up with you, to follow you on your website called Gut Bites. If you want to say anything more about your website really quickly to let everybody know.
Sure. Yeah. So, as Alicia was saying at the very beginning, there's many different hats that I wear in my life and even within my career. And so, one of those hats is as a clinical gastroenterologist. And when you hit 45 now, it's not 50 anymore, and it's time for a colonoscopy, I would be the physician that you'd see. And I find it very gratifying taking out precancerous polyp and preventing somebody from the gut ache, literal, figurative, of cancer is huge. I find that very gratifying in my work. But at the same time, I also recognize that there are upstream factors contributing to the development of the increasing prevalence and incidence of polyps and colon cancer. And so the other hat that I wear is how can we short circuit that? And that's where the microbiome comes to play. That's where my interest in nutrition comes to play. And that's where this website that Alicia mentions comes to play, Gut Bites, where I find inspiration in taking the latest research, the most avant garde gut health research, and translating that into Gut Bites, into um, digestible but science research backed blog articles to help inform people directly on why it's important to eat healthy, how to eat healthy. And then the little calculator I was talking about as well, giving simple tools to people to be guiding lights for how to eat healthier, because I think it's very easy to get disillusioned and confused by all of the conflicting information that you hear out there around how to eat well. But trying to take the best evidence-based information and provide that in an easy to digest way, so to speak, is the inspiration of Gut Bites.
No, I love that. And I think that in this environment, it's very overwhelming to try to eat healthy because there's so much news all the time on what's healthy and what's not healthy. So I will have a look at this as well. And
Wonderful.
I want to say thank you again for joining us today. And I hope to see you again.
Yeah, no, this has been great. Really appreciate you having me on the show, and I wish you and listeners good gut health.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap for our conversation with Dr. Chris on the microbiome. We explored how the gut bacteria influences our metabolism and our immune system, and even maybe our cravings. But remember, knowledge is power only when you put that to action. If you are looking for a simple way to track your fiber intake and balance with carbs, Dr. Chris has created a lovely website called Gut Bites, where you can have a look on how to make better food choices for your gut health. Be sure to check that out, and I will leave the link in the description. Of course, thank you for showing up for another episode with me. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Instagram for more science-backed insight. And if you would like to be a guest on the show to share your research, visit sciencegenies.com. Until next time, keep your gut and your mind happy and healthy.